Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third celebrity typing live stream. Welcome. Well, if you're not aware of how this works, the idea is that for $20, which can be donated through a super chat, which you can do at the bottom, I will type any public figure. That's any celebrity, any historical figure, anyone in the public eye, anyone I can get information on based on videos online, based on quotes, based on works of art and other productions and public writings, anything of that nature. If you'd like me to type anyone who's a public figure, please make a $20 donation or more, and I will set about typing them. So at the moment, we have 10 concurrent viewers. Would anyone like me to type anyone? Simply send a super chat, and that can be done just at the bottom of the chat. Just waiting to see what people say. Hmm. Hi there, Berry, sweetheart. Yes, day's going all right. Been relatively busy. Ah, good morning, random name. Hello. How are both of you? I'm just enjoying my mint tea. Hi, DJ Granville. All right. So again, for people who don't know the score, we've now got 17 concurrent viewers, 18 concurrent viewers. The idea is if you'd like me to type anyone, please make a super chat of $20. If you do that, I will type someone. That can be any public figure, that can be any celebrity, any historical figure, anyone like that. There's someone you've been wondering about for a long time, someone you want to get my view on, please make that super chat and I'll be able to have a look at them right now on this live stream. Thank you very much, LLD. Please type Charles Lindbergh, the aviator. I will get started. Thank you. All right, Charles Lindbergh, the American aviator. So, he was born in 1902, died in 1974. Oh, died in Hawaii. Very nice. Let's see. So he was an American aviator, military officer, and author. He made the first non-stop flight from New York to Paris. Okay, so Quite an adventurous person then, flying alone for over 33 hours. His aircraft, the Spirit of St. Louis, was built to compete for the $25,000 Orteig Prize for the first flight between the two cities. Although not the first transatlantic flight, it was the first solo crossing of the Atlantic and the longest at the time by nearly 2,000 miles, setting a new flight distance world record. Fascinating. Time magazine named him its first Man of the Year in 1927. He was appointed to the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. Ah, goodness. His firstborn infant child was kidnapped and murdered. It's terrible. Non-interventionist, said some things about Jews people didn't like. Hmm. All right. So someone who isn't necessarily very politically minded, or I should say, isn't necessarily very political with a small p in terms of how to manage his public profile, but seems to be someone who certainly likes going off and doing quite daring things in an aeroplane. Because yeah, the first solo transatlantic flight. If you think about, there's another person who did that and died. I think a few people died. Certainly, adventuring was quite dangerous, setting these sorts of records. Can't remember who disappeared into the Bermuda Triangle, was never seen again. Can't remember, but people have died trying to do that. So yeah, let's take a look. Early career. From early age, he exhibited an interest in the mechanics of motorized transportation, including his family's Saxon 6 automobile, later his Excelsior motorbike. Started college as a mechanical engineering student, from fascinated with flying, had never been close enough to a plane to touch it. He quit college and enrolled at Nebraska Aircraft Corporation's flying school. Hmm. There's a certain single-mindedness there, a clear set sense of what he wanted to do. He left flying, though, after the onset of winter, returned to his father's home. He returned until half a year later. Right, so he left flying, I guess, because of the onset of winter. To his formal flying lesson in the same aircraft. He was never permitted to solo because he couldn't afford to post the requisite damage bond. Right. Interesting. Spent much of the remainder of 1923 engaged in almost non-stop barnstorming under the name Daredevil Lindbergh. I just need to just check what barnstorming is. For entertainment, stunt pilots perform tricks individually or in groups. So yeah, device to impress people with the skill of pilots and sturdiness of planes. So yeah, there's a certain daring element to him. There's a pursuit of thrill to this. Hmm. Oh, Kleber just asked a question. Who's the man in the painting in the wall? That is Carl Gustav Jung, the psychiatrist, the Swiss psychiatrist that birthed Jungian typology, you could say. So, a very, very important figure. But back to Lindbergh. So, later bit this year was critical development both a focused, goal-oriented individual and as an aviator. That's when he earned his army pilot's wings and commissioned as second lieutenant. Right. A serious flying accident in 1925, mid-air collision, forced him to bail out. Wow. Critical development, right? Turned to civilian aviation. So why did he join the military? Several times when landing, was grounded for a week. Goodness. Goodness. Again, there's a sense of daring is very, very clear here. And focus on what he wants to do. global fame after his flight. So he had unprecedented acclaim after his historic flight. Hmm. So he had a lot of fame very quickly after achieving this historic flight. And it sounds to me he wasn't really, it doesn't sound like the sort of person who'd been very suited to this. He was only 25 at the time. He did an autobiography. Right, someone else published his autobiography. Well, it says he wrote it, so. Hmm. No, I guess he did write it. It says that he wanted to share the story of his life, his transatlantic flight, and his views on the future of aviation. And the we was a spiritual partnership that developed between himself and his airplane during the dark hours of his flight. But apparently, it was chosen without his knowledge or approval, and we'd forever complain about it. And he complained it meant him and his backers, not him and his plane. But it appeared unconsciously in his use of a phrase. Okay, so some sort of pursuit of connection, but not something he wants to sort of show very obviously, even though it does appear in his use of language. And to someone who also seems to be quite comfortable being on his own, going off and doing things quite independently. I mean, my impression at the moment is a gamma extrovert. Question is which one, SEE or LIE? He was an intensely private man. Here we go, is what I thought. Intensely private, became exasperated by unrelenting public attention. Oh, this was due to the kidnapping. Goodness gracious. Scientific activities. So I watch from the navigation easier for pilots. Put Lindbergh hour angle watch. Hmm. Interested in the work of rocket pioneer Robert H. Goddard. He was interested in engineering right from the beginning as well. So you can see the extroverted logic as well as the extroverted sensation. And his sister-in-law developed a fatal heart condition. He began to wonder why hearts could not be repaired with surgery. He studied the perfusion of organs outside the body with Nobel Prize winning French surgeon Alexis Carrel. And he invented a glass perfusion pump. Fascinating. Made future heart surgeries possible. I mean, I'm leaning more LIE to be honest. He's shown enthusiasm for meeting the foreign correspondents, have a perverse liking for enlightening visitors on the Third Reich, as they say it, and we have not pressed for an interview. Took the controls attention, took them some pain, a little maneuvers, return most passengers. The talk is at Limburg's favorably impressed by what the Nazis have shown them. Hmm, interesting. So it is the first American to examine Germany's newest bomber. without a pilot. So the BF-109, we knew of no other pursuit plane which combines simplicity of construction with such excellent performance characteristics. Okay. I think American ambassador to Germany has a dinner for Limburg. This dinner was went to the Commander Cross of the Order of the German Eagle. The acceptance became controversial when only a few weeks after his visit, the party carried out Kristallnacht. Hmm. He declined to return the medal, later writing, "It seems to me that the returning of decorations which were given in times of peace and gesture of friendship can have no constructive effect. If I were to return the German medal, it seems to me that it would be an unnecessary insult. Even if war develops between us, I could see no gain in indulging in a spitting contest before that war." Yeah, he's not extroverted ethics oriented. Or if he is, he's not flexible in it. He's stubborn in it if it is something of value. Ambassador Wilson later wrote, "If you refuse a donation and pretend on those circumstances you've been guilty of a breach of good taste, it would have been an act offensive to a guest ambassador of your country in the house of the ambassador." His reaction to Kristallnacht was entrusted to his diary. "I do not understand these riots on the part of the Germans. They seem so contrary to their sense of order and intelligence. They have undoubtedly had a difficult Jewish problem, but why is it necessary to handle it so unreasonably?" Yeah. I heard you found the house in Mondsey. So Nazi friends discouraged him from leasing it because it had been formerly owned by Jews. So, I wouldn't say he's particularly pro-Jewish from the sound of it. Anti-Semitism views on race. His speeches and writings reflected his adoption of views on race, religion, and eugenics, similar to the German Nazis. He suspected of being a Nazi sympathizer. During a speech, he said, "No person with a sense of the dignity of mankind can condone the persecution of the Jewish race in Germany." Um, Interventionist pamphlets pointed out that his efforts were praised in Nazi Germany and included quotations such as "racial strength is vital, politics a luxury." Hmm. So it sounds to me he was not a man who was cruel. He was a man who saw aspects of Jewish people as problematic, I guess. It suggests a certain amount of anti-Semitism. Um, Henry Morgenthau believed he was a Nazi. It seems to me that he had anti-Semitic opinions which were quite common at the time, regardless of whether you were with Nazi Germany or not. Um, Though he wasn't, at least from his comments, genocidal in his desires. But I think it sounds to me he also had a certain lack of political nous for how that would be perceived, which was to his detriment. Lindbergh always championed military strength and alertness. He believed that a strong defensive war machine would make America an impenetrable fortress. Yeah. Okay. I mean, you can see sort of the extra sensation values there. Going to make excuses for Hitler, much I disprove many things he's done. I believe Germany has pursued the only consistent policy in Europe in recent years. Cannot support a broken promises. She's only moved a little faster than other nations in breaking promises. The question of right and wrong is one thing by law, another thing by history. Goodness. This was on 1939. I mean, okay, it was still 1939. It wasn't, in the 40s. It was not. This must not be looked at in terms of what was then discovered about the Holocaust. But it's, it's concerning to see. He's not so much a supporter of Nazi regime, so so stubborn in his convictions and relatively inexperienced in political exactly that he easily allowed rivals to betray him. That's one exactly. Exactly. Hmm. Let's see whether I ever find any quotes on him. All other stuff. He had a double life and secret German children. Goodness. 10 years before he died, he wrote to each of his mistresses, imploring them to maintain the utmost secrecy in matters of affairs. All three women kept their affairs secret, even from their children. Goodness gracious me. Byzantine layers of deception on the part of their shared father. Heavily involved in conservation movements, deeply concerned about negative impacts of new technologies in the natural world, native peoples, campaign to protect endangered species. Hmm. His speeches later in life were centered on technology and nature. Life and believe that all the achievements of mankind have value only to the extent that they preserve and improve the quality of life. Hmm. Views on technology. He's concerning the impact of technology on humanity. He recognized the narrow margin which net society trod in the unstable nuclear era. His work after World War II confirmed the fear that humanity now had the ability to destroy in minutes what previous generations had taken centuries to create. And so he changed from a technologist to a philosopher protector of a Tacidae. I'm not sure what that is, a preaching term for the materialistic mechanistic society. So a society based on simplicity, humiliation, contemplation, prayer. Interesting. Let's see if we can find some quotes by him. Hmm. Risk life and flight. He'd rather by far die on the mountainside than in bed, and life without risk is worth living. So views on civilization and nature. If he had to choose, he'd rather have birds than aeroplanes, and real freedom lies in wildness, not in civilization. Safety lies in the judgment of the chances one takes. Rather, yeah, I don't believe in taking unnecessary risks, but life without risk isn't worth living. Success not measured by what a man accomplishes, but by the opposition he has encountered and the courage which he has maintained the struggle against overwhelming odds. So there's a lot of gamma extrovert theme in here. Theme in this. Yeah, a lot of gamma extroversion. Um, Life is like a landscape. We live in the midst of it, but can describe it only from the vantage point of distance. Tolerance is a virtue depends on peace and strength. I'm leaning LIE for him. There's a reflectiveness to him which I wouldn't expect from an SEE. Must learn from the sermons of Christ, the wisdom of Lao Tzu, the teachings of Buddha. So you see some extrovert intuition in there as well. There's a broad-mindedness to different perspectives. To a person in love, the value of individual is intuitively known. Love needs no logic for its mission. The value of the individual is intuitively known. I think the introverted ethics values are showing there. Real freedom lies in wildness, not civilization. I think there's this idea that, him wanting to be free by going out into nature and taking risks, overcoming the odds, struggling against nature, that it sounds to me as a sense of freedom for him in that, almost that is his independence, which again I think speaks a lot towards gamma extroversion. I've seen the science I worshipped and the aircraft I loved destroying the civilization I expected them to serve. We Americans are a primitive people. Americans seem to have little respect for the law or the rights of others. Goodness. Um, so I think there's almost a sense of irritation and contempt towards his, his fellow his fellow Americans. And I think this idea of, people getting into his business, struggling with the intrusiveness of fame. There's a sense of he just wants to get away from it all. I'm leaning LIE for him. I am leaning LIE. Yeah, I think LIE. And let's see if we can find um an interview with him, maybe. Crime of the century, Limburg kidnapper brought to justice. That's about the kidnapper of Limburg himself. Oh, there's biographics. Well, I want to see an interview. Secret Lives of Charles Lindbergh. Pleads for independence. See this.
At this time, to enter a plea for American independence. It is amazing that one should have to plead for American independence in a nation with a heritage such as ours, in a nation which in its infancy revolted against foreign control, and whose people have fought time and time again against the armies and interference of the old world. Yet the independence and the destiny of America were never more in jeopardy than they are today. Why, with 130 million people, are we being told that we must give up our independent position, that our frontiers lie in Europe, and that our destiny will be decided by European armies fighting on European soil? What has happened to this nation that it fears in maturity the forces that it conquered in its youth? What change has come over us? What foreign influence has sprung up among us? Where is the blood of such leaders as Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln? Blood that stood firm on American soil against the threats, the armies, and the navies of the greatest empires on earth. What we lack today is the type of leadership that made us a great nation. We do not question the need for rearmament, for reform, for a better economic system. What we do question is the leadership that has brought these conditions upon us. We question that the men who were unable to see these conditions in time to avoid them, who could not foresee the war in time to prepare for it, who refused to believe the reports of rearming abroad when there was still time for action, are now competent to carry this nation successfully through a period of great crisis. Under their leadership, we have alienated, one after another, the most powerful military nations of both Europe and Asia, at a time when we ourselves are unprepared for action, and while the people of our nation are overwhelmingly opposed to war. There is no question about the fundamental courage and solidarity of Americans when our national welfare is at stake. There is no division among us about the defense of our own country. We have always been ready to fight against the interference of foreign powers in our affairs. If need be, we are ready to die for the independence of America, as our forefathers have died before us.
So
when necessity arose.
key thing here is the Americans should have stayed independent in the war, is his view. And we shouldn't be drawn into these sorts of things. It's not our problem. That was the key thrust. Oh, no, that's his son, I'm assuming. No, can't find any direct interviews with him addressing US neutrality. See, he spoke well, whether one agrees with what he says or not. There's an eloquence there. And you can see there's a tendency to reflect on trends, how pe what decisions are being made, what ramifications, long-term ramifications those are. There's, as I said before, there's a certain amount of political naivety certainly earlier on, but coupled with the decision to really try to protect his reputation by making sure that all three of his mistresses maintained secrecy in the years before his death. Shows, he was mindful of the negative effects of damage to his reputation. Sorry, I've got to very quickly pause the podcast because my wife is out and my son is crying. I'll be right back. Hang on just a second. Let me just get the camera. Stop. Hi, sorry about that. So, what was I saying? It's a certain amount of political naivety, but also a the recognition of the need to protect his reputation and eventually taking that quite seriously. So, yeah, I think extroverted ethics as a role function makes sense. There's a clear amount of trying to persuade people in terms of America's position in the war and getting more involved in sort of the politics, where he felt it was necessary, but also largely leaning towards maintaining independence and not getting involved in wars, and speaking critically about the Nazis. Um, yeah, innovation, especially when things personally affected him, such as I think it was his sister-in-law who had that fatal heart condition, and then really being quite innovative in terms of the medical field, which is a fascinating deviation from someone just focused on airplanes. It shows that breadth mindset, which I think became more apparent when he was older as well, especially to dive into different philosophies, different religions. Um, yeah, it seems to me this is quite an innovative, fact-oriented person, politically naive, but became more politically involved. Um, yeah, and with a strong desire to maintain independence and a certain amount of contempt for other people, even whilst getting involved in matters of public consciousness. So I'm thinking LIE makes the most sense from what I can see here. I hope that helps. Um, let's move on to someone else. Let's look at Sean Astin. That's from Darwin. Thank you very much, Darwin. Let's look at Sean Astin. As I said, we just done Charles Lindbergh. I think ENTJ makes the most sense. So now let's look at Sean Astin. So Sean Astin, I'm aware he is the actor most famous for playing Samwise Gamgee in Lord of the Rings. What else can we find out about Sean Astin? Um, began his career as a child actor. Made his debut playing Mickey Walsh in The Goonies. He's in Toy Soldiers. Hmm. Let's see. First acting. Let's actually see what his he's a graduate of Crossroads High School for the Arts. In masterclass in acting at Stella Adler. So it was interesting in acting quite early on. The whole business about his paternity. I mean, it's not really relevant to his personality. Um, early career, first acting role was in Please Don't Hit Me, Mum. Uh, okay. Yep. Did a lot of acting. Personal life. Met Christine Harrell. Have three daughters. Tattoo of his ankle, the word nine, written with the Tengwa script. Yep. Lord of the Rings, Elvish, I'm assuming. Commemorating his Lord of the Rings involvement. Character's membership of the Fellowship of the Ring. He is a Lutheran Christian, had been baptized in his wife's Lutheran church. It's interesting that he was baptized in his wife's Lutheran church. So this is something he found later, not something he started off with, what he was raised in. Hmm. Lifelong supporter of the Democratic Party, as almost every actor is. Back to John Kerry. Yeah. Okay, that doesn't tell me very much. There's such richness looking at Charles Lindbergh's Wikipedia article. There's very little in Sean Astin other than, yeah, he's in some films. Let's look at some quotes. I guess the point is Sean Astin hasn't done anything that controversial. He's sort of trodden, the commonly acceptable line, you could say. I mean, it has three daughters. That's also quite something. It's very sort of quite a sense of embracing the more traditional mindset. Um, I'm talking about wholesome family existence. Aston that UIUC, University of Illinois. Hmm. Yeah, so pretty sort of upstanding individual. Nothing really controversial here. Some quotes from his movies. I don't want to see his movie quotes. Right. My dad was a Buddhist when I was young, so when I was begging to become a Catholic, he was saying no and imparting Buddhist precepts. That's interesting. He wanted to become. Why did he want to become Catholic though? What was the reasoning for that? What motivated him? Because he actually became a Lutheran, which isn't Catholic. It's Protestant. I mean, more Catholic leaning out of the Protestants, not quite Calvinist, but still. My diet is always terrible, unfortunately. I don't know moderation. There's nothing as special as watching greatness. Hmm. Love all sports. I can't think of any I don't love. I've even come to appreciate cricket. I could play a sports writer. Hmm. Not smart enough to play Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe there's someone to take me by the hand and slowly and carefully walk me through. My wife's very patient. Got a motorhome and drove from LA to Idaho, then down the coast. I was running a lot. And so she would drop me, drive 6 miles, park, and wait for me. Right, so he was doing a lot of running, doing a lot of exercise. Okay. I don't want to pay the fat guy or the friend for the rest of my life. Was that why he was getting himself into shape? I don't know. Um, I not really want to be stuck in Lord of the Rings the rest of my life and being desperate to do kind of make sure that I could do something else with my life. So I don't wanted to be stuck, wanted to do something else. It doesn't look like much about something else has shown up in terms of his public actions. And maybe it's more of his private life. Want to do more work behind the camera and take for granted how easily information can swirl around me. Can't play a hobbit if you're not prepared to be part of nerd culture. He loved going on stage, loved the nervous feeling, the performance of the doingness of it. It always felt kind of natural, inevitable, and logical. Just a softy at heart. I mean, I think I'm. I mean, if you were to just sort of look at him, you get the sense he's probably an SEI, but I don't really know. I need something more firm than that. I don't want to just go on off confirmation bias. So let's see if we get an interview with him. Here we go. These interviews aren't very. Stephen Colbert's interviews aren't really. They don't reveal much. Oh, great. It's not any good interviews. Actors Guild, maybe. Maybe the Actors Guild. Oh, there isn't an Actors Guild interview. An in-depth interview? I don't want the talk show TV interview. I want something good. This could be interesting.
What went through your mind when you were told you're going to be Sam?
Yeah. Did you read the books?
I I had never heard of the Lord of the Rings. This is gonna.
He'd never heard of it. So he wasn't a nerd to start off with.
Graduated a double degree history and American literature and culture with honors.
Hmm.
Voted book of the century. And they
Was a good student.
yeah, so these lists. Who put that list together? Can't wait to meet this guy Pulitzer. But my agent called Nikki Mirish at William Morris. Then I was at William Morris. Darling, honey. She was like right out of central casting. You have to have a flawless British accent by Tuesday. Like, okay, I can do that. Like actors, you put stuff on your resume, like horseback riding and fencing, and they're like, great, they want you to fence. Like tomorrow, I can learn fencing in the night. That's not a problem. I'll be a fencer. I can be anything you want me to be. So, what is it? She goes, Peter Jackson is doing the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
I think he's an alpha. There's a lot of self-deprecating light humor.
Peter Jackson is doing blah 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 trilogy, new line. That's what I heard. And like trilogy, I mean, if it's Peter Jackson, it's going to be a big movie, and if it's a trilogy, now you're in this epic whatever. But and she said, you know the books, right? And I was like, the Phantom Tollbooth. She goes, the sequels to The Hobbit. I'm like, right, The Hobbit. My mom read to me all the time as a kid, but she read like Steinbeck, The Pearl, and stuff like of Mice and Men. I didn't get Bilbo and the dwarfs with the fixing plates and all that stuff. I didn't get that. I was totally dragons. I love dragons. I who knew anything about dragons? No dragons, no drinks. So, so I was like, okay, yeah, of course. So it was one of those phones in the car. This was 1998. 1999, early 99. And so I'm driving and I hang up the phone like on the big brick thing you have to hang it up on. And I turned my car around. I went right to Barnes and Noble, and that's a bookstore. Now, for those of you who don't know what a bookstore is, yeah, me too. Thank God for Barnes and Noble. There should be more brick and mortar.
Someplace you can go and read up with your computer. Your Wi-Fi. So the Wi-Fi, exactly. Starbucks, Wi-Fi, and occasional book. But I went in there and I said to the guy, "Do you know Polk?" He looked at me like you're looking at me. He goes, "Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien." I'm like, that's the
All the
guy.
humor is at his own expense. This is someone who really doesn't want to come across like he's better than anyone.
He goes, "This is all Tolkien." And I was like, the first thing, I kid you not, the first thing I did, I was like,
Also, look how he dresses. He dresses like he wants to look smart, but also look fun at the same time. And not be taken too seriously, although he wants to be respectful by wearing a tie. It's that look is I want to look respectful. I don't want to look disrespectful. I want to dress smart enough, but also not be taken too seriously by anyone, which is why he's got the jacket, he's got the tie, he's got the the checked shirt, and he's got. I think is he wearing jeans? I think he might be wearing jeans.
comic book. I mean, kind of a sophisticated comic book, but still something you'd see like jutting out the cover of comic book. And then Alan Lee's illustrations, which are Alan Lee is the
But that's a suit jacket.
Illustrator, like the one guy.
I don't know if he's actually wearing suit trousers. I go back to when he was standing up. Yeah, he is wearing a suit jacket and he's wearing jeans. Exactly.
I was like,
he wants to look like he's taking it as it properly should and not to look schlocky, but at the same time, he's wearing jeans. So he does not want to be he doesn't want to be taken too seriously either.
But it's right before the stairs. It's with Howard and something. So I sat down with that guy, and it was like I felt really comfortable. And he was like, "You got this. He's like, you're gonna get this part. You're gonna get this part." So once I got to the place in the book that maybe the first audition scene was, I stopped reading, and then I just focused on the audition scene. Now, my dad worked for Peter, and I knew that Peter and Fran, their partners, writing partners, producing partners, liked me. They liked me because for just one scene. Thank you so much. I'm just looking at this pretty video. Oh, all right. So that's right. So it's intimate. It's just us. So they.
Well, that's a request. Where to go?
So they had seen Rudy. They had seen
and trainers
Rudy with my dad.
Formal up top, informal down low.
With Michael J. Fox from their like garage screening room, like years earlier, a couple of years earlier, and were telling me how much they love my performance and all this stuff. So when I went into audition, I knew that it was like a friendly room. I knew they were in New Zealand and we were going to be put on tape, but I knew they were going to see this tape.
It was a friendly
and
room.
I knew that when they pushed play, that they'd want to like whatever they saw. Which is a lot of times when you audition for stuff, it doesn't feel like that. You walk in and you almost feel like the default setting of the people who are casting is to like get people out of the way. Like, they
talk about the tension, the pressure of the experience of being in front of people.
Where you even started. Get nervous.
Yep.
Just like you don't want to hear the gong. You don't want the hook to come out of
the pressure, the awkwardness of them not feeling welcome.
We cast my dad in Frighteners, and she cast my brother in some TV show. And when I saw her at like the Frighteners screening or somewhere else, she was always like, "I gotta find something for you. I gotta find something for you." So like all the signs.
I want to find out about Catholicism, Lutheranism for him. Why? Religion. Let's say religion. What does it say? Here we go. What's this about?
Myself, I'm kind of Catholic.
Okay, because
But I am it's complicated. I studied Martin Luther in college. I went to a Catholic school for 3 years. My mom was a Catholic. I have a very complicated religious kind of pathway that I've taken. So I would, but go ahead, Protestant.
Well, no, and I would love for you to take us through. We actually did a story on it. We didn't talk to you about, it, but we sort of pieced together your background.
Oh, you did?
A couple years ago, yeah. I'll tweet it to you. And it's
The
very
link,
interesting.
here's the link.
Yeah. Okay.
I probably need to learn.
I guess the question for me is, what does being a Christian mean to you?
Interestingly, it doesn't necessarily mean community in the way that a lot of Christians embrace each other. To me, it's a very personal thing. It's in some ways about sublimating my logos, and just knowing that in the quiet moments of my life, I feel less alone. And I really embrace the idea of forgiveness. It's one of the most important values that humanity can leverage in terms of cultivating progress of any kind. Forgiveness is really the ballgame on this planet, and so I like that fundamental principle in Christianity. An awful lot of the Bible, which I've read cover to cover, that I find that doesn't have any resonance for me in my life. The logic of which doesn't connect with me at all. And yet, there's my daughter wanted to read it the other day, and I read her Genesis. And as a science-loving person who understands what the political arguments are, God, I loved reading it to her. I loved feeling it, and I hate the fact that that certain ideas have been grabbed and used for war and for killing and for suppression and for divisiveness. I hate that. But some of the language and some of the emotions and some of the ideas, boy, they're hard to beat. And if you really read the Bible and then you look everywhere and certainly in American literature and culture and history, it's shocking to see how prevalent the Bible is.
This is fascinating.
That, have a knee-jerk reaction and all right, see that. And I'm not advocating that fact. I'm just saying
It's the reality. You're saying it's the presence of the Bible.
McDonald's commercials. You're like, really?
So, I mean, for you,
I missed something before. Hang on.
And yet there's my daughter wanted to read it the other day, and I read her Genesis. And as a science-loving person who understands what the political arguments are, God, I loved reading it to her. I loved feeling it, and I hate that certain ideas.
She's a sun-loving person. He's a science-loving person.
And that you still sort of work through and where you stand on different pieces of it? Is it something, I think for a lot of Christians, it's an ongoing process, something sort of landed on where you know what you think?
So it's interesting, but for him, Christianity is actually not about the community side. It's about not being alone when he's on his own. And it's about so it's a private, personal thing for him rather than the big public thing. But it is very much about forgiveness. There's a sense there, sort of removing the pressure on himself. Yeah. I still think he's alpha, but I think he's not alpha extroverted. I think he's alpha introvert from the sound of it. It's it's interesting how he's exploring the structure of the idea as well, sublimating the logos, he said, but it's going through what makes sense to him, what doesn't make sense, and that's very important for him. He wanted as a child to get more into Catholicism, and his father wouldn't give it to him. And later for his wife, he went towards Lutheranism, which it is the most Catholic leaning of the Protestant approaches. So, not the most, but one of the more. Certainly, again, it's not Calvinist. It's not sort of hardline anti-Catholic in the way that a Calvinist is. But it's
Well, it's not. I mean, where are you sort of now?
so it's sort of, you know, more midway. It's not. There's no sort of firm, hard views here. It's very soft. It's about forgiveness, about removing that tension and pressure on him, and giving himself grace. Um, yeah, peace loving.
Well, a Catholic priest friend of mine handed me
Hmm.
the Apocrypha. You know what the Apocrypha is?
He's sort of nerdy about it as well.
I don't know what the Apocrypha is. I didn't know what it was. So there's the Bible that's this thick, and then there's the Apocrypha, which is this thick. And this is all the stuff that was cut out of the Bible over the last 2,000 years. And when you can see that this much stuff was in there that got cut out, and there's that much that's left, it gives you a sense of context, not to feel like a slave, and not to feel scared by other people and what to think or believe or feel. Whether it's Bill Maher, who's this cripplingly intellectually abusive atheist. My father's an atheist. I would love to talk to Bill Maher about his atheism, because
I'm sure he'd love to have you on.
I would love to, because I think he does a
You hear
disservice.
that, Bill Maher?
Bill, I think you do a disservice to intellectuals with your excessive need to promote atheism. Think that'll get
What do
me
you
on the
think?
show?
Well, I think that's.
And
what
yet I- and yet-
drives that, though?
I think he does a disservice to atheists.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of atheist activists. A lot of atheists would say that the activist realm.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, people are certainly free to promote what they think and feel, and I certainly think a lot of what Bill Maher says makes a lot of sense. But to kind of dismiss a feeling that millions of people are having is it's just not.
Doesn't like dismissing. He doesn't like he what there's an expectation things should actually be more open in conversation. And yet he's also talking about his journey into religion as being very much about it's very feelings oriented, how he feels in his space about this. There's both introverted ethics in there and introverted sensation as the means by which he processes things. And it sounds to me as though his growth, that need he's taken on is developing a faith, developing a structured way of viewing this. It's not anti-structural, it's embracing a certain set of structures that make logical sense to him. You see there's a logic as well, but then he processes it very much in terms of his sentiments. So that's telling me introverted ethics as a demonstrated function. I think with plenty of extroverted ethics there as well, in sort of a quite soft, not over the top way. There's the expectation for extra intuition. It's valued. He doesn't like it when it's not shown in a way which he wants it to be shown. Though he himself doesn't seem to have a very broad range of interests. He goes into certain things, and it's kind of private.
Not very generous. So
Not very generous of spirit. That's the thing. Generous as a spirit is important to him.
That message.
I studied the English Bible as literature. Professor Batten at UCLA. My wife and I spent a summer reading the entire King James version of the Bible from beginning to end. We actually got Alexander Scribby's audio version of the Bible.
Yeah.
We read and highlighted and went.
It's funny. There's almost a wonkish nerdiness about him around religion. But he didn't know much about Lord of the Rings. He's not, wasn't into that typical nerd culture, but he's adapted to it and become more like that over time. But in terms of religion, he's gone into the structural understanding, how it fits together, how it makes sense. You can see the introverted logic there. I'm leaning a lot more towards SEI for him.
Every word of the Bible, but not as revealed truth, as a work put down by human beings. And I found it terribly inspiring and interesting and off-putting. But as a work of revealed truth, I don't think I'm a good enough Christian to comment.
So that's interesting. That's very interesting at the end. So for him, it's not revealed truth. It's a work of human. It's a work of human beings. Let me go into that a bit more.
Bible, and we read and highlighted and went through every word of the Bible, but not as revealed truth, as a work put down by human beings. And I found it terribly inspiring and interesting and off-putting. But as a work of revealed truth, I don't think I think I don't think I'm a good enough Christian to tell it.
So there's a desire to go in and to go and understand, what makes it, how it fits together, how it makes sense, but there isn't a grandiosity. And he shied away from the grandiosity of talking about this book as being the revealed truth or any sort of absoluteness. Again, he keeps it quite soft around the edges. There's a lot of keeping things very soft around the edges. If you read his Wikipedia again, it's everything's very soft around the edges. It's sort of wholesome. He's got a family, three kids. He's found faith. But he hasn't gone sort of overboard in that either. He doesn't like it when things get dismissive, things get a bit too harsh, a bit too, in his words, more sort of bullying. He doesn't like that sort of approach to anything. But he won't take any very strong positions on much other than, you know, he you know, you shouldn't dismiss people who are of faith. It's a valid perspective, and does atheism disservice to speak overly dismissively around that. He's stuck to very sort of conventional, socially acceptable political positions. Um, it'll be interesting to maybe see how, say, the more sort of LGBTQ progressive, socially progressive aspect of the Democratic Party links with his Christian religion, of course. But I imagine he also wouldn't want to wade into that territory anyway, because that would be tense and potentially unpleasant and open up to criticism. When it's clear to me he needs a lack of social tension and enjoys environments where there isn't that sort of social tension, where it is welcoming, when there's no pressure being put on him. I'm thinking SEI. I think that makes the most sense from what I've seen so far. Um, have people actually been seeing what I've been seeing? Okay, yeah, people have been seeing that video as well. Good. Um, yeah. Pale Valkyrie I said, if he's SEI, isn't Samwise SEI too? Um, that's the thing. I've typically thought that Samwise Gamgee is an SEI character, but at least he's portrayed in that way, certainly to start off with. He becomes quite a very sort of brave and very defensive figure later on, and one might even start to figure maybe an ESI sort of figure. So I'm not entirely sure on Samwise Gamgee's character. I just think from looking at Sean Astin, SCI makes the most sense from what I can see there. All right. So that's SEI. Next is Schmerd's $19.99. Thank you for that. Though it's 1 cent off, but I'm thinking that it would be silly of me to not accept it just because it's 1 cent off. So fine, I'll look at Flannery O'Connor. Let's take a look. Flannery O'Connor. American novelist and short story writer. Let's see. Mary Flannery O'Connor was an American novelist, short story writer, and essayist. She wrote 2 novels and 31 short stories. There was a number of reviews and commentaries. Often wrote in a sardonic Southern Gothic style, like heavily in regional settings, grotesque characters, often in violent situations. an unsentimental acceptance or rejection of the limitations, imperfections, or differences of these characters. Unsentimental acceptance or rejection of limitations, perfections. Often reflects a Catholic faith. Frequently examines questions of morality and ethics. Almost always about the action of grace on the character who's not very willing to support it. I think these stories are hard, hopeless, brutal. The action of grace on the character who's not very willing to support it. Acceptance or rejection of limitations, imperfections, differences of his characters. Interesting. I need to see an example of this. Anything that comes out of the South is going to be called grotesque by the Northern reader. Unless it is grotesque. Unless it is grotesque, in which case it's going to be called realistic. Interesting. Her fiction is usually set in the South, features morally flawed protagonists who frequently interact with characters with disabilities or are disabled themselves. The issue of race often appears when works feature disturbing elements where she did not like to be characterized as cynical. I'm mighty tired of reading reviews that call a good man brutal and sarcastic. The stories are hard, but they are hard because there is nothing harder or less sentimental than Christian realism. These stories described as horror stories, I'm always amused because the reviewer always has hold of the wrong horror. So this is very interesting. For her, God was a given of experience, not a mere intuition of the mind or spirit. And Mary McCarthy told her that she considered the Eucharist only a symbol, a pretty good one. O'Connell completely disagreed whether it's a symbol, to hell with it. She did not write apologetic fiction, the kind prevalent in the Catholic literature of the time, so that a writer's meaning must be evident, without didacticism. Yeah. She's not trying to convince people of a way of thinking. She's trying to show Christianity through character. Ironic, subtly allegorical fiction about susceptible backward Southern characters, you fundamentalist Protestants, and the transformation of the character to a figure brought them closer to the Catholic mind. Transformation is often accomplished through pain, violence, and ludicrous behavior in the pursuit of the holy. There's almost something Dostoevsky-ish about this. Sardonic sense of humor, often based on the disparity between a character's limited perceptions and extraordinary fate awaiting them. You see an example. What's an example? Okay, so let's look at the Violent Bear It Away. That's an example. Southern Gothic novel. You can't be any poorer than dead. 14-year-old boy is trying to escape the destiny his uncle would prescribe for him, the life of a prophet. Evangelist, Selden prophet dies many years after kidnapping great nephew Francis in the backwoods cabin, painted that someday is a prophet. Symbol with a cross. Hmm. definitely explores the what's the word? The imperfections of human character. Very sort of candid. Hmm. Told Roosevelt his great uncle's two main requests for he be given proper burial, that Tarleton's nephew Bishop be baptized, had been realized, which convinces that he can no longer run away from his calling to be a prophet. So it ends with Tarleton heading towards the city to fulfill his calling to go warn the children of God of a terrible speed of mercy. Fascinating. Major themes, religious imagery, destiny religion will dominate over the secular. Destiny dominates every obstacle in its way. Drowned bishop is transformed to baptism. Rape turns to revelation. Okay, so destiny is a part here. That deep themes, deep imagery, hard reality. I'm starting to think that introvert intuition, extrovert sensation play a role here. Let's see what quotes we can find of Flannery O'Connor. Yeah. Hmm. Okay. She's oh okay. She only died. She died at age 39. Goodness, that's short, quite a short life. Faith is what someone knows to be true, whether they believe it or not. I don't deserve any credit for turning the other cheek, as my tongue is always in it. Conviction without experience makes for harshness. The writer should never be ashamed of staring. There's nothing that does not require his attention. Writing a novel is a terrible experience during which the hair often falls out and teeth decay. Very sort of wry, grim humor. Base of art is truth, both in matter and mode. It's best at age of search and discovery, and it's worse in age that has domesticated despair and learned to live with it happily. I don't suppose there's an interview. Try. It's a documentary. An interview. Mm.
Oh, you have to ask me to come here tonight and read a story. Now, found that at most universities, the storyteller is tolerated as long as some abstract statement can be run in by them. He's apt to find himself reduced to making comments about his own stories or other people's, and the process leaves him very much like the handsome hero of Poe's story. The one who, before he went to bed at night, removed his wooden arm and his wooden leg, his teeth and his voice box and his wig and his glass eye. What was left of him was not impressive. With this much said, I should let well enough alone and go ahead and read my story. But since the story I want to read is considered grotesque, and since for many people the word grotesque is a description tending to be pejorative, I figured I might as well hazard a few comments about the kind of story this is, and about what makes it that way. I've discovered that any fiction that comes out of the South is going to be called grotesque by the Northern reader, unless it is grotesque, in which case it's going to be called realistic. When my fiction first began to receive some attention, it was generally considered to have come out of that mythical entity, the School of Southern Degeneracy. Every time I heard about the School of Southern Degeneracy, I felt like Brother Rabbit stuck on the tar baby. I think the social sciences have cast a dreary light on the public approach to fiction. If you write about people,
Yeah, she is bemused by how she's perceived by others, and how her writing is commonly perceived by others, which I think is a common tendency with gammas as well, deltas as well to some degree, but also with gammas. I'm inclined to think that there's such a strong focus on character. I think introverted ethics plays either a leading or mobilizing role here. I'm thinking she's a most likely gamma introvert. If she weren't a gamma introvert, I could maybe look at EII, but I'm thinking that in a way, introvert intuition is playing such a key role here. The idea that the character in the book I just read a synopsis of could not escape his destiny, or at least how what he perceives to be his destiny. And in doing so, there's some element of grace in his actions. It's almost a sort of begrudging bestowing of grace upon those who probably don't deserve it. It's sort of the idea in her writing, I can tell.
don't always wear shoes.
And yet people find it too harsh, almost grotesque because it's too harsh.
Southern degeneracy, you accept the label grotesque with better grace. Essentially, any writer who produces stories that can be called grotesque does so because he has that kind of a talent. But I believe that in addition, there are reasons that intensify the grotesque quality of some writing in these times.
The deep sardonic wit. There's a biting quality there. I'm leaning ILI. I'm leaning ILI. I mean, is SEI possible? Maybe. I'm not sure yet. I'm leaning more ILI. She had a very secluded life. Her writing was on the kind of grasp of nuances human behavior. Gave many lectures on faith and literature. Traveling quite far despite her frail health. She's an integrationist by principle, segregationist by taste. I don't like. Oh, goodness. They all give me a pain. The more of them I see, the less and less I like them, particularly the new kind. Goodness gracious me. See, this is the sort of thing which also leads me more towards introverted logic as well. She reflects on both the introverted logic and also the introverted ethics. she's experiencing individuals of certain behaviors that she doesn't like, so she's reflecting on that, but also knows, but at least in terms of principle, I do think they should all be integrated. It's almost sort of anti-ideological racism. And I think very few people would be so frank about that. I mean, that is how she writes her characters as well. Called a common biographer. There are also letters where she even talks about a friend that she makes in graduate school, University of Iowa, is black, and she defends his friendship to her mother, unless it's complicated to look at. I don't think that we can box her in. I'm thinking I lie. She addressed the Holocaust story as a displaced person. Integration, everything that rises must converge. Short story. See what happens here. Plot summary. She lives with his mother in an unnamed southern city, resents his mother, who has not gotten over the loss of his parents' luxurious plantation lifestyle. She was stung by his mother's criticism. His internal narration feels a martyr complex tinge of arrogance and self-righteousness. Mother's daughter asked her to attend exercise classes. I was reluctant. She doesn't want to ride the bus, which is reasonably integrated. The culture is in the mind or the heart. About how you do things affects who you are. Franklin mother's open racist, wants to make a show of being nice to a high status black person in front of his mother, is blind to his own prejudices and finds it hard to find a black person who satisfies the criteria for respectability. He tries to start a conversation with a well-dressed black passenger. The man politely keeps his distance. When that woman and her son Carver get on the bus, he refuses to move next to his mother. Forces Carver's mother to sit next to him, and Carver to sit next to June's mother. She initially pleased because his mother is visibly upset that her son is sitting with a black adult, but seemed dismayed to see his mother being nice to Carver. Julian's mother proves certain kinds of black people that she can treat paternalistically, such as children and domestic servants. There's a complexity to this. There's a lot of complexity and nuance. Julia's mother and the two black passengers all get off at the same stop. His mother decides to give Carver some pocket change in a usual condescending but well-meaning manner. Julian's horrified, and Carver's mother is infuriated by what she sees as a personal insult. Carver's mother punches Julian's mother, which appears to trigger a heart attack. Not seeing the symptoms, Julian berates his mother for her outmoded racial views, proclaiming that the old manners are obsolete. And if Gracious is not worth a damn, doesn't realize his mother's in danger, and she starts hallucinating and calling out for her old black nurse Caroline. As Julian finally calls for a doctor to remark that he is about to enter the world of guilt and sorrow. So it's criticizing that sort of self-righteousness. Fascinating. Burroughs likes to turn things off on its head. So how blacks and whites could live together in a post-segregation world. She said that it requires considerable grace for two races to live together, particularly when the population is divided about 50-50 between them, and when they have our particular history. Can't be done without a code of manners based on mutual consent. For the rest of the country, the race problem is settled when the guy has his right. The southerner, whether he's white or coloured, that's the only beginning. She included about the modern South, the old man is obsolete, but the new man have to be based on what was best in the old ones. So again, quite thematic analysis going on here, even of situations in society, what will be needed for people of different races, different backgrounds actually get along with each other. I'm leaning ILI. I don't see much extroverted sensation. Visual art. She was an avid cartoonist and painter. I don't know how to write, she once said, but I can draw. 2 barrels full of paintings and wood tile. hidden. It was thought by a trusted who worried it would distract her from her fame as a writer. She was an avid reader of Christian existentialist philosophers such as Gabriel Marcel, considering herself a Catholic peculiarly possessed of the modern consciousness. I think that the South was Christ haunted. Frequently used bird imagery. She was diagnosed with lupus. Goodness. I think I lie. This is a deeply mentalized person, deeply thematic, with also an awareness of character in all of its bleak complexity, but at the same time with a sense of Christian salvation. It's almost, and you're right, it's almost a sort of a non-sentimental analysis of who the person is without any sort of, without any what's the word, no mincing words, no hiding the things which are not convenient to think about a person, but then at the same time working back in that sense of grace after almost unsentimental analysis of the person. So yeah, I'm inclined to think that the ILI makes the most sense for her. Let's see if there's anything else I can find. Think of the other book. Maybe a short story. A good man is hard to find in other stories. A good man is hard to find. So a family of 6, which on its way to drive into Florida, is slaughtered by an escaped convict who calls himself the Misfit. They take its family on vacation. Family, including Bailey, her grandson, and an infant grandchild, tend to her daughter-in-law ignore her. And then leave the next morning. Grandmother occupies the backseat of the family's car, just finally, so that if she's killed in an accident, she'll be recognized as a Southern lady. She hides the family's cat, Pity Sing, in the basket between the legs, only to leave it home alone. The plantation being in the area was a mistake after training Bailey to turn down a rocky dirt road, surrounded by wilderness. Embarrassment when she realizes that error caused her to disturb the cat, leads into Bailey. He loses control of the car and ultimately flips into a ditch. No one's seriously hurt. The accident is witnessed by part of 3 strange men, one of whom the grandmother recognizes as the Misfit. She knows who he is. And the 3 men lead them off to the woods because they're shot. The grandmother confusedly pleads for her life. Since she knows he's a good man, the Misfit, initially dismissive, grows more and more unsettled by her words. She was seeking to find solace by praying. The Misfit is uncertain if Jesus' power is real, unclear about his own purpose. Finally, upon seeing his despair, the grandmother reaches out, touches his shoulder, tells him he is one of her babies. The Misfit immediately shoots her to death. His companions return. The Misfit, holding the surviving Pity Sing, says the grandmother would have been a good woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life. He seems to conclude that violence affords no real pleasure in life. Goodness. The themes of anguish, mercy, charity, divine grace, imitation of God. The offers of grace made to the grandmother and the misfit at the climax of the story immediately after the already agitated misfit explained his anguish was not being able to witness whether or not Jesus is Savior, and that it was by faith alone he decided Jesus is not Savior. Cutting himself in grace is a very decided matter, required a real choice, act of will, affecting the very ground of the soul. This is touched by the grace that comes through the old lady when she recognizes him as a child, as she has been touched by the grace that comes through him in his particular suffering. For the misfit, O'Connor explained that the opportunity of grace offered to him by the grandmother's touching him, an act she calls a gesture. Her head clears for an instant. She realizes in a limited way that she is responsible for the man before her and joined him by ties of kinship to have her roots deep in the mystery she's been merely prattling about so far. But when she does the right thing, she makes the right gesture, and then she dies. And O'Connor's reference to the mystery and Mammon prattle about is the incarnation of Jesus as Saviour, as a means for the people to be absolved of their sins or to be turned. It was selfless. The grandmother was not in the least concerned with God, but reached out to touch the misfit. In a letter, O'Connor explained that the misfit did not accept the offer of grace in the story, but that the grandma's gesture did change him. His shooting is a recoil, a horror at her humanness, but after he has done it and cleaned his glasses, the grace has worked in him and he pronounces his judgment. She would have been a good woman if he had been there every moment of her life. Been criticized as an unreasonable action by a cat, often perceived as intellectually or morally or spiritually incapable of doing it. Sort of about prejudice. It was seen a little here to inspire hope or redemption of any of the characters. So she often goes a bit too harsh, you could say, and it's sometimes hard to actually bring back believability in terms of that this person actually has the good in them somehow. So I think one of the difficulties for Flannery O'Connor was bringing people along on the journey in terms of making the characters even remotely likable, so that when it comes to their moment of grace, that the audience is willing to believe it. And I think that could very well be an extroverted ethics blind spot. Yeah, I think INTP, I lie, makes the most sense. I don't see any other type which would work as well from the look of it. All right. So those are the 3 people I've typed today. Does anyone else want me to type someone? Let me know. I will stay on here for another 5 minutes or so. 10 minutes. Another 10 minutes just to see if anyone else wants to make any sort of super chat. And if no one else makes one, then we can finish the live stream. But yes. Thank you very much to LLD 3007, Darwin 8958, and Smurds for your super chats. Meantime, I got people asking, is Kurt Cobain IAI? Yeah, I think we've typed him actually in our gallery as IAI. Kurt Cobain. It's in response to Andre. Simone Weil seems to be a similar character to her, says Silk. FRE uploads. Yeah, I need to look into Simone Weil. Actually, maybe we've looked at before. Oh yeah, we've looked at Simone Weil. I think we typed Simone Weil EII actually. But yeah, look, EII and ILI are quite similar. They're both adjacent on the benefit cycle. But yeah, I think that the harshness is just a bit it's almost a bit more for her. It's harsh judgment, constrained by Christian faith and there's the Catholic belief in grace. Yeah, it's gamma values constrained by Catholicism that comes across in this. Did she have any relationships? She never married and died at 39. She had no romantic love. She had one boyfriend, a book salesman. Hmm. He was saying that at the time he kissed her passionately on the lips. Her lips collapsed, and he found himself kissing her teeth. It felt like kissing a corpse to him. Repulsed, he ran off to Sweden and married another woman. Yeah, again, I don't think the actual experiential aspect of relationships was her strong suit. In the story, she killed off women like her mother. The most famous incident is a good man is hard to find. She told friends she was safe. Her mother didn't read her stories, found them too depressing. That was a good biography. Gooch didn't tell enough about O'Connor's able, assertive mother, a sharp businessman who was standing enough around a successful farm, but left in the backwater. So she killed off her mother in her stories. So rather than deal with the relationship directly in person, she brings it into a story. Which again, could suggest weaker extroverted sensation. Yeah, I think the extroverted sensation is likely weak but valued in her. It's very funny, but she kills off her mother in the stories. After Flannery stories, I read To Kill a Mockingbird, which drags a bit to me. I enjoy the movie. Was most free the one I famously dismissed Mockingbird as a children's book. Point might disagree. Conlon mistook Lee's sunnier view of human nature for sentimentality. Another thing, I don't think any ASI will dismiss a sunny view of human nature as sentimentality. I think that makes sense for an ILI. It really makes sense for an ILI. This is an intellectual woman who is grappling with ethics in the introverted ethics with no appreciation for the extroverted ethics. It's almost more extreme what you expect from an ESI. Right. So yeah, I think INTP. I think that's quite clear. The next one, thank you, Isaac Clement. That is Harold Stassen. Let's look at Harold Stassen. Was an American Republican Party politician, military officer and attorney who was the 25th governor of Minnesota from 1939 to 1943. He was a leading candidate for Republican nomination for president of the United States in 1948. He was considered for a time to be the front runner. He lost the nomination to New York Governor Thomas E. Dewey. He thereafter regularly continued to run for the presidency and other offices, such that his name became most identified with his status as a perennial candidate. Born in West St. Paul, Minnesota, he was elected as a county attorney of Dakota County, Minnesota, after graduating from the University of Minnesota. Election as governor, youngest person elected to that office. Okay, so very ambitious from an early age. Sought presidential nomination again. Yeah, so ambition, ambition, ambition. What else can we see? So he opened a law office with Elmer J. Ryan in South St. Paul. So yeah, 1930. Yeah, so he was 23 when he got into politics. Arnold Joyce was suspended from practicing law. 3 years later, taking office, Stassen was elected president of Minnesota County Attorneys Association. The Republicans Committee in Minnesota was one of the 3 elected to be temporary members of the state. Let's say about his early life. He was an intercollegiate debater, an orator, captain of a champion university rifle team, BA degree, the LB, in law, it's in Minnesota Law School. So, yeah, he went into law, but really is interested in politics from very early on. His mother was German. Father was born in Minnesota, German father and Czech mother. Yeah, doesn't go into sort of details there. The first action was to order an audit of expenditure in the State Department. He has signed the law at Minnesota's first civil service law. Organized a farm problems conference. Despite that he was constitutionally ineligible for the presidency because the president was supposed to be at least 35 years of age, some Republicans supported his involvement in presidential politics, and Secretary of the Interior Howard Ikes commented that Stassen was a political upcomer and was more serious than Dewey. Created the Interracial Commission, the first civil rights organization in Minnesota, appointed African-American World War I veteran Samuel Ransom as a military aide. It's in the 30s. Supported Franklin D. Roosevelt's foreign policy, encouraged the state Republican Party to repudiate American isolationism before the attack on Pearl Harbor. So he was a hawk. You know, so if re-elected, he'd resign to serve on active duty within the United States Naval Reserve. I was going to say presidential politics. They're best known as being a perennial candidate. So always, so in a way, you can say he's almost like the Republican version of Joe Biden from the sound of it. See, it sorted 9 times. Wow, he never won the Republican nomination, much as the presidency. He never even came close after 1952. He continued to campaign actively and seriously present. So it's just ambition, 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 ambition. Why was he never? Why did he never win that nomination? He's a liberal Republican and challenged more conservative Republican Party. So he opposed Senator Robert A. Taft, favorite son and leader of the conservative coalition. In Taft home state of Ohio. Yeah, and I think the primary seen as breaching political etiquette and was defeated. In the primaries, Taft attacked Stassen's liberalism, believing he was a disguised New Dealer. Okay, so he was on the left of the party. On the left of the party, so sort of centrist position. This is someone who adopted positions that he thought, well, I think he adopted positions that he thought would make him more likely to win the presidency. That's my impression from this. Civil rights, staunch supporter of civil rights, African Americans, and had an integrating African Americans into the university's football team. Thought about to be integrated into the faculty of the university. At the same time, he called for the banning of the Communist Party in the United States, given the majority of conservatives with stances against the embargo on Cuba, military intervention in Vietnam. Okay. Sort of a centrist figure, very, very ambitious. Let's see an interview of him. I think the key thing is, why did he not succeed? He breached political etiquette early on. Why did he continue to not succeed? I'll type in. See. He never secured a major party presidential nomination because of shifts in the political landscape, strong competition of major figures, and its transformation from a serious contender to a perennial candidate over many decades. He became almost a joke over time. Stronger rivals in early attempts. So the front runner, but General Dwight D. Eisenhower entered the race and quickly gained overwhelming support, leading Stassen to drop out and support him. Waning political influence. After joining Eisenhower's administration, he lost his direct political base and momentum. His influence further diminished when he publicly and unsuccessfully tried to remove Vice President Richard Nixon's 1956 re-election ticket. He was a moderate internationalist Republican, but the Republican Party began to shift rightward towards candidates like Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan. So this is someone who doesn't read the current of the times and adapt to it and eventually find his way to be the crest of a wave. He's always sort of behind the shifts. But again, very, very ambitious. He continued to run often without significant support or a viable campaign structure. His lack of broad modern campaign appeal and his loser image further hindered his chances. Right. The grand old party's grand old loser. Let's take an interview of him. And getting the impression this is someone who's very influence-oriented, quite centrist in his views, but could not ride the political currents and could not preempt them effectively. Because we'll just go for the ambition without a sense of direction and timing for that.
It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? Larry Lasser from the CBS television news staff, and John Oates from the editorial board of the New York Times. Our distinguished guest for this evening is the Honorable Harold E. Stassen, Director of the Foreign Operations Administration.
Not many persons in the executive branch of government have a bigger or more controversial job than a director of foreign aid. But even this year, an economy-minded Congress cut only 3% from the vast appropriation he asked for, $3.5 billion in foreign aid. Mr. Stassen, how long do you think the taxpayers of America will have to bear this burden of money aid to our allies overseas?
I think it'll continue to reduce, but in some degree it is be necessary as long as there is a grave Soviet threat in the world.
Well, now, Mr. Stassen, several senators have been saying that the present bill can be cut by 50% or so because of previous unallocated appropriations. I'm sure there's an answer to that. Would you tell us what it is?
Yes, the previous unexpended appropriations are committed to the building up of jet air forces in various countries, and it takes a long time to build them. If we decide today in this Congress to help establish jet squadrons in Spain, it'll probably be 4 years before that money is spent. And that's why there's always a big carryover of unexpended and in many instances unobligated money.
So suggesting that $2 billion or so is simply waiting to be spent isn't quite an accurate picture.
No, it's a matter of what we call the lead time, the time it takes from when you plan with Congress till you finally get the forces in being or the technicians established in overseas areas.
Well, Mr. Stetson, how do you know it's doing any good? Now, your fellow Republican Clarence Brown of Ohio has said that since 1940, we've given over, I think, $50 billion to our friends overseas, and we've got fewer friends now and more enemies than we ever had before. Is this true?
No, it's not true, of course. Take, for example, the situation of Germany and Japan to begin with. They were not exactly friends 10 years ago, but the people are very friendly and building strength together at the present time. And of course, there are disagreements and there are criticisms at times from other countries. That's a part of freedom. We do not have the forced agreement of the Soviet area, but actually there's a lot of friendship around the world to the United States.
In that connection, I'd like to ask you what you think of the policy that's sometimes advanced of using our economic strength to influence the internal political policies of the countries that are recipients of our aid, such as forcing land reform in Italy through our economic aid, or tax reform in France, that type of thing.
Well, you should not try to force internal conditions
Persuade.
of that. It's a matter of persuasion. That's right. It's a matter of how will the aid money be used and how can it be effective.
He's not
And in that
a dynamic
respect,
figure.
Land reform, better wages for workers, greater productivity, a freer exchange of goods between the countries of Europe, for example, those are a part of the way in which the free world can be stronger and the conditions of living be better, and therefore, in turn, communism have less chance.
Mr. Stetson has been quite a hassle in Congress over some of the projected riders which have been attached to the foreign aid bill, and one of them, I believe now, Senator Nolan's, is
Something more revealing. Huh.
Subject to deal with. But we do need to really champion American agriculture, reach out to the other agricultural states, and change the whole outlook of the portion of income for American agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Stassen. The final response to Ron Clark's question will be made by Wheelock Whitney.
It's great to hear your ideas, Governor. They're very refreshing. I would like to say that as I travel around the...
I think this is someone who is weak at introverted intuition. This idea of trying again and again. If you just keep trying, you'll just get it. And of course, he never gets it. It becomes a joke. Very ambitious and believes that persistence gets him to where he needs to be. He's quite dry.
My heart goes out to the people on the Iron Range where employment is up to 30+%. The border community
Coming due. We have hundreds of millions of dollars in loans. Mr. Stassen, let's talk about those taxes. Would you or would you not keep those taxes to keep the budget balanced, the extra sales tax and the surtax? Mr. Whitney, you said you would cut spending. Tell us where. And Mr. Weinberg, you said...
very technical. Life and Times of Harold Stassen.
He's a great relationship guy. And he says to me one day, about 9 years ago, he says, you know, since you love history, you'd probably be really interested in something that I'm working on. So what's that? He says, I'm going to write a book about Harold Stassen. I said, okay, that is cool, because I'm a history man. I knew 3 things about Harold Stassen at the time. He had a really bad toupee. He'd run for president 9 times, and he was the U.S. One of the delegate members of the United States to the United Nations conference. Right, so that was pretty much my knowledge of Harold Stassen, even though he was a Minnesota guy. This is probably the worst thing you can do to somebody who's writing a book. Is that from that point on, every time I saw Steve, I said, "How's the book coming?" Right? It's coming along. It's coming along. Right? I was for. Thank you, Jamie. I just realized it took me as long to write this book as it took to get my son through elementary and middle school. It was a long path, but I appreciate the comments. The feeling is mutual, and my son too has his permit. So good luck with that. Good luck with that. I just realized when I walked in this room, the last time I was in this exact room is several years ago. I was the prom coordinator at my high school, and we used to have it at Hazeltine Golf Course. And I don't know if any of you remember, several years ago, Hazeltine completely shut down for a year to completely renovate, and I had to come up with the task of finding a new place to have it. Now, this was a wonderful location. It was a relatively new hotel, but I have to tell you how much better it is to be here with all of you than 300 high school students who are scarfing down their food and getting ready to dance, or some sort of proximity of what they call dance. So it's wonderful to be here. I very much appreciate it. I have to tell you the question that I always get asked is why Harold Stassen? Why would you research Harold Stassen? And actually, Jamie, your comments were very timely.
This is the
About
most
11 years
interesting
ago,
source, I think.
I've been a high school history teacher for 21 years, and I took a year off to work for Dakota County. And I was working at the Dakota County Historical Society. Tom, can I take this off? Is that all right? Can I take it off? Sorry, I move around a lot in the classroom, so I hope this is okay. And I was sitting at a beautiful, beautiful oak desk. And I asked one of my colleagues, where did this desk come from? This is a really nice desk. And she said, she was a librarian at the Dakota County Historical Society, and she said, well, that belonged to Governor Stassen. And I gave her this look. I realize now that some of you who are married can associate with the look of when your spouse says, like, the Johnsons are coming over for dinner. Remember, we said we'd host them? And you give them that look like, yes, of course, of course. And I said, oh, absolutely, Governor. It's got the drawers and everything. And I had no idea who Governor Stassen was when she said that, but I faked it. And that night, I went home and I jumped online and I looked up everything I could about Harold Stassen. And little by little, over the course of the next 6 months, I found articles, I found references to him. And the more I learned about him, the more I kept asking myself the question, why has nobody written a book about this man's life? Why, I mean, why has nobody taken the time to research and then present to other people all that this man has achieved? And so the question of why is perfectly natural until you read the book, and then it just explains itself. I love your theme, be a gift to the world. I didn't know that until I came here. But after you learn a little bit more about Harold Stassen, I think you'll realize he is one of the great gifts that Minnesota made to the world in terms of international peace, justice, civil rights, morality. He is one of our great state and national treasures. And it was my goal to present that to as many people as I possibly could. The other reason I researched Harold Stassen is I believe as a history teacher, I have an obligation, a professional obligation, but even really an ethical obligation to make history proximate, to make it close. You all know Dred Scott Friendship Village. That's where he passed away about 6 months after his wife. So he was very late in his life. He lived right here in Bloomington. So I've got a couple slides here that I want to share with you, and I'm very, very appreciative of your time. I'll try to be as brief as I can. A friend sent this to me, and it says, you guys remember the old cartoonist, the single plane cartoonist in the Tribune by the name of, thank you very much, Ginden. This is a great one. Honey, do you think there will be much demand for a one-man show featuring an imitation of Harold Stassen? And I put this, I didn't get on Facebook until the book came out because my editor said, yes, it's a great way to create word of mouth. And so I put it on my Facebook page about 2 weeks ago. And one of my friends said, I think I wrote in there, I'm not saying these two people resemble anyone in my house. I'm just saying. And a friend of mine said, dude, that is awesome. That is right on. Your wife has been making fun of this for years. And then my mother-in-law wrote on there and said, tread lightly. In about 2012, a gallery of Minnesota also ran this issue. And they'll give it to him. And he'll just go up to the board and he'll make a wonderful to my students. He leaves and I turn around and some kid in class goes, that was really weird, Mr.
Yeah, they did the stories.
Way too excited to see him. I said, well, he's kind of a legend, you know. And the reality is Harold Stassen was the boy wonder of Minnesota politics in the 1930s. The reality, making fun of himself kind of story. About 1984, somebody asked him, Governor, why do you keep running for president? Of course, Ronald Reagan ran virtually unopposed, and Harold Stassen said, I'm running this year to make Ronald Reagan look younger. Okay, which is great, By the end, I'll tell you why he kept running over and over again in his own words. The reality is Harold Stassen was the boy wonder of Minnesota politics in the 1930s and 40s. He was born in West St. Paul on his family's farm, went to the University of Minnesota. He graduated from high school when he was only 15 years old. He graduated from the University of Minnesota by the time he was 19. He had his law degree by the time he was 23.
Hard working, goodness.
County attorney in Dakota County down in Hastings. And then in 1938, he decided to run for governor. He's elected overwhelmingly, and he becomes the youngest governor in our nation's history at that time. He was only 31 years old. And that's when his national reputation began. And one of the things that made him really unique as a Republican at that time, he was a moderate Republican. He was a progressive Republican. And, you know, it's really interesting. I was at a retreat this last weekend. I was very grateful that on Thursday I was not around to watch the debate.
You know what?
And the truth of the matter is that those aren't really debates.
I'm wondering.
They're really Q&As. And they're really meant to have kind of a gotcha moment. And I told a friend it'd be a great SNL skit to have those debates and then have like trap doors under the people. And when they say something that is just absolutely ridiculous,
I wonder if he might be LSE.
Go down, and now we're down to 9. And then we're down to 8. I was going to start this book with a debate that took place in 1948, a true debate.
I'm wondering if LSE is possible.
Governor Thomas Dewey of New York on the radio, 40 to 80 million people were listening. It was going to be the largest radio audience to date. And it had one question. One of the candidates would be affirmative, the other would be opposed, and they would debate it out on the radio. The question was, 1948, can you imagine a more controversial question than this in 1948? Should the Communist Party be outlawed in the United States? And they debated that for an hour. And I was going to start the book with that, and my editor, very smartly, it hurt at the time, but it was very smart. She said, Steve, that's a great story, but I don't think it's going to work in the prologue. And I said, why not? She said, you got to start where people are. You got to meet your reader where they are. And of course, what she meant was the toupee and running for president over and over again. So that's the prologue. Later in the book, I go through that debate, but it's a wonderful example of intelligent, politically astute statesmen debating the most critical issue of the day. And then winner take all. It ended up being kind of the high point and eventually the turning point in Harold Stassen's career. But in 1940, he was an up-and-comer, a rising progressive voice in the Republican Party. This is a great picture. This appears not in the book, but in a number of presentations I've done. in 1940, Harold Stassen was governor, and he was asked to give the keynote address at the 1940 Republican National Nominating Convention in Philadelphia. It's a huge honor for somebody who hasn't even reached his 37th birthday. Okay. And the man on the far left right here is Henrik Shipstead, Minnesota's congressman. Now, Henrik Shipstead was at one time a Republican, but then he had left the Republican Party and joined something in Minnesota called the Farmer Labor Party. He realized that the Farmer Labor Party was kind of on the rise, and he wanted to be in that party. And the man in the center is Wendell Willkie. And the great thing about this story is Wendell Willkie represented for Republicans in 1940, not only an outsider, this is the first political office he ever ran for, president, aiming pretty high. He had made his money in utilities. He was a very wealthy man. He was a very successful businessman, but he was an internationalist. Remember, this is a year before Pearl Harbor. So in 1940, Wendell Willkie is already talking about the Republican Party needing to open up its mind to the possibility that the United States had a major role to play in international politics. What's interesting about this picture is it takes place in St. Paul shortly after Willkie won the nomination. And Harold Stassen had helped make that happen in 1940 by not only giving the keynote address, but then breaking from tradition and saying, I think Wendell Willkie should be president. Now, one of the theories that I have in the book is that forever cut his ties with the powers that be of the Republican Party. They were frustrated. They didn't like the idea that an outsider, a liberal outsider, a moderate outsider, an internationalist had come in and taken the nomination, and they blamed Harold Stassen for it. So it's like Richard Vandenberg, Thomas Dewey, Robert Taft, Richard Nixon, Joe McCarthy. These guys would never forgive Harold Stassen for his moderate approach in 1940, and it was only going to get worse after that. He served in World War II. Imagine this, folks. Imagine this. A sitting governor of the state of Minnesota during war saying he had won in 1938. He wins re-election in 1940. Prior to the election in 1942, he announces to the electorate, I'm going to run again, but I plan on resigning my office after the first legislative session because this war is going to be fought of men of my generation, and I believe I should be with them. He didn't have to. He was considered what was considered essential civilian personnel at that time. But he told the voters, I will resign. I want a new lieutenant governor. His name's going to be Ed Thigh, a farmer from Northfield, Minnesota, who had become a close personal friend of the governor's. And he not only won, he won by the largest margin he'd ever won by, okay? And keeping his word, in the spring of 1943, resigned as governor and then went and trained at the Great Lakes Naval Station in Chicago. And he entered U.S. Naval Reserve. This is him with Chester Nimitz, one of the men that he served under. The bulk of his time was under Bull Halsey in World War II in the Third Fleet. Have any of you read the book Unbroken about Louis Zamperini? I suspect several of you have been made into a movie. Harold Stassen was charged with a task in 1945, shortly after the surrender, the end of World War II, which we're celebrating the 70th anniversary of this summer. He was charged with the task by Bull Halsey of going in and liberating 20,000 American, British, Dutch prisoners of the Japanese. And one of the camps that you read about or saw in Unbroken was called Omori. It was right in Tokyo Bay. And Harold Stassen, now at that time, Louis Zamperini had been moved into the mountains, if you read that book. But this was the ranking officer that he liberated, a guy many of you will remember, a guy by the name of Greg Pappy Boyington. You ever heard of Black Sheep Squadron? So this is Greg Boyington, who had gone down in the war, was presumed dead, had already been given the Congressional Medal of Honor, assuming that he was dead.
So some key things here. This is a guy who has, again, a certain amount of political naivety, but it's almost a strategic political naivety, making certain mistakes early on that would deprive him of what he was really, really going for and make it almost impossible to succeed. At the same time, then not realizing, not getting it through his head that it was basically impossible for him to be the president and continued doing it, eventually to the point where it just became a bit of a joke. But he still continued doing it in a self-deprecating way, even as late as with Reagan. So yeah, I'm thinking introverted intuition is could very well be a vulnerable function here. When I talk about being an exacting versus determined type, it's about stubbornness and intuition. This is being determined, not being exacting. This is a determined tendency. The belief it's still possible to be the president. If I just try again, I could be the president this time. If I just try again, I become the Republican nominee. Never quite accepting it is just not going to happen. That seems to me to be the key pattern here, the key blindness for him. And key thing is also, I said ambition. This is a guy who worked really hard, who was very effective, very competent at what he did very early on, was a very, like a top student, clearly, graduating so early. Yes, ambition, right? Wanted to get involved in public life. But the key thing is climbed up very high because it seemed to be he was competent and very admirable for his competence. Quite a moderate, no strong positions. I don't think, I take back what I said about him perhaps aiming at becoming a presidential figure, that being the key reason for his views. I don't think he's in the IE at all. No, I think he was actually just moderate and quite pragmatic in a sort of, but and in doing so with a certain strategic political naivety to how that would be perceived by others and how it actually would lead to certain enemies, at least based on what this fellow's analysis is. Um, so I'm leaning more LSE for him.
And as Halsey's planes went
Another thing, when the war breaks out, actually standing down as a from his governorship and actually going off and joining the war effort. This idea that he not being comfortable with the idea of sitting above what's going on, but actually needing to get involved and do his part himself, which is again very admirable, and also something which I think is very consistent with what an LSE would do.
Omori, I get goosebumps every time I say this. The men had whitewashed on top of the barracks, Boyington here. They had written Boyington here. And within the next 24 hours, Harold Stassen had come ashore. And this is shortly after the first meeting between Harold Stassen and Pappy Boyington. This is when they've taken him onto the hospital ship. And Boyington wrote in his memoirs later that Harold Stassen walked up to him and said, "Pappy, we're sure glad to see you. We thought you were dead." And Boyington turned. They had seen each other earlier in the war and said, "Thank you for coming, Lieutenant Commander. What took you so long?" And Stassen said, "Once we saw the footage, the aerial footage that you were here, we couldn't wait one more day to get you out." So it's a wonderfully touching scene. In the midst of his war experience, Harold Stassen, I spent a whole chapter on this. It's also the 70th anniversary of the creating of the United Nations. Harold Stassen was still very young, Lieutenant Commander in the U.S. Naval Reserve, when Franklin Roosevelt appointed him and 6 other delegates to represent the United States at the founding ceremony, founding charter writing convention in San Francisco. Harold Stassen had said ever since college that the goal in his life was to help establish world peace. He always believed world peace was more important than anything else that he could achieve in his life. He became an international lawyer. This was his one great moment to make a substantial contribution to that idea. And what's great about this is, I'm going to show you a picture in just a minute of the delegates. Franklin Roosevelt had learned a lot from history. You may remember from your high school history classes, you might remember learning about Woodrow Wilson and the League of Nations, and it was partisan. The idea was that Democrats and Democrats alone were going to take credit for that. And it didn't ever get signed here in the United States. Republicans in the U.S. Senate stopped it. Franklin Roosevelt sent 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats and his Secretary of State to negotiate the UN Charter. And he did it because he didn't want it to be a partisan issue. And Harold Stassen would not only represent young progressive Republicans, he'd also represent 16 million men and women in uniform because he was the only one on the delegation who had actually served in the armed forces during World War II. Now, I want to show you, this is a very famous picture. And the central figure in here, almost everybody will know, okay? This is Douglas MacArthur making good on his famous promise of "I shall return to the Philippines." But there's a figure in this picture who I've always found, I've taught about MacArthur for many, many years, and there's a figure in this picture that I've always wondered about, and it's this guy right here, okay? Shorter than the rest, he's Filipino, he's a general in the Filipino army. And his name is, it took me a while to find this out, his name is Carlos Romulo. He was a lawyer, a diplomat, a college professor, and then he ended up becoming an aide to Douglas MacArthur during World War II. And this is one of those, this is a true story. You're not going to believe it, but this is an absolutely true story. In the midst of this research, I went to New York City, and I did research at the United Nations. My brother worked out there. I'd never been to Manhattan. I stayed in his hotel room with him, and I went up there, and I asked, "What do you have from the founding convention?" And they said, "We really don't have a lot. You're welcome to look around our library." And I was there for 3 days. And on the second day, I walked over to a shelf, and I found these leather-bound books. And I opened it up, and they were the original typewritten bound manuscript from the convention. And I said, "Bullseye. I got it." So I looked through, and I found out that Harold Stassen was in charge of what was called the Trusteeship Committee. So imagine this. In 1945, you've got a lot of countries in the world, a lot of what we consider first world countries after World War II, Britain, France, the United States, Russia, Germany. All of these countries, at one time or another, had overseas colonies of various size, various shape, and in various places. Well, the goal of the committee that Harold Stassen was chair of was to figure out how the rest of the world, okay, parts of Asia, parts of Africa, parts of South America, would eventually gain self-government independence. So, Carlos Romulo is representing the Philippines, which up until a year before had been part of the United States. So when Harold Stassen was born in 1907, U.S. soldiers, Marines, were actually in the Philippines and basically keeping our interests in the Philippines, our interests, not the Filipinos' interests, okay, part of this American empire. So there's a debate that I found the transcript for. And the debate is between Carlos Romulo, the short representative of the Philippines, and the British delegate, a guy by the name of Lord Cranborne. What a great British name, Lord Cranborne, right? Okay. And in the midst of this debate, Lord Cranborne says, "We've come up with language that describes the rest of you countries, and we're going to put the word self-government in there." And Romulo gets the chair's attention and says, "Sir, with respect, we'd like to see the word independence included in the UN Charter." And Cranborne quickly dismisses him, as a Dutch delegate would have done, a French delegate would have done this, and he quickly dismisses him and says, no, you don't understand, sir. The world is like a ladder, he says. The world is like a ladder. And on the top of the ladder are advanced people who can govern themselves, and at the bottom of the ladder are people who can't take care of themselves yet.
And in what must have been a remarkably intriguing rebuttal, Romulo says, "Sir, my English isn't as good as yours. I acknowledge that. But I think what you're referring to is countries standing on their own and not relying on others for help. And if that's what you're referring to, I would ask you to acknowledge any country in the world that in the last 4 years hasn't needed somebody else's help." And he was saying this to the British representative. Absolutely unassailable argument, right? The rest of the delegates cheer. Cranborne sits down and shortly later leaves the hall. And I wanted something, I was hoping for something that would represent Stassen's humanity. I never met him. I talked with his family members, but I never met him personally. And I kid you not, I was Holy Angels, for those of you who are familiar with our campus, is a very old building. It was built in 1931. Every year I give away at our school auction what's called a tunnel tour. We have tunnels underneath the school, which kids from like the 40s and 50s all the time. No, but they say it, and then their kids and grandkids all go, "My parents were in the tunnels." No, they weren't. Flashlight, in the middle of this tour, I went down. There's a book by Carlos Romulo called Crusade in Asia. I kid you not. I open it up, and I look in the index, and I see if the name Harold Stassen's in there. It is, and I'm getting goosebumps. And I turn to the page where Carlos Romulo describes the exact debate that I just told you about, and he says, afterwards, Harold Stassen of the United States picked up a pencil, wrote on a slip of paper or something, handed it to an aide who walked it over to me. I opened it up, and it said, "Congratulations, we're proud of you." In other words, you stood up to the British delegate, and guess what word ends up in the UN Charter? Independence. Independence. Major turning point in world history. That these countries will seek independence. And of course, for people from India, okay, this is Harold Stassen. This is the Secretary of State, Edward Stettinius. This is Arthur Vandenberg, senator from Michigan, at one time an ardent isolationist who came around, became one of the great spokespersons for the UN. This is Adlai Stevenson, okay? And this picture, I have a version of it from a different angle. And over here, between Adlai Stevenson and Harold Stassen are two figures you'd also be familiar with. One is Nelson Rockefeller, and the other, of course, John Foster Dulles, who were there as kind of aides to these seven delegates. I love this picture. It's got so many figures that in the 1950s and 60s would become prominent figures in American foreign policy. All right, 1946, Harold Stassen comes home. Good money had him running for the U.S. Senate. Now, he could have won that. It would have been against Henrik Shipstead, who had gone from the House into the Senate. By the way, I told you the UN Charter had the word independence on it. It was voted on in the U.S. Senate. It was passed almost unanimously. Only 2 people voted against it. One of them was Henrik Shipstead from Minnesota. Instead of running for that seat, Harold Stassen tells Ed Fye, who had taken over as governor, "You should run for the Senate. My skills are more oriented toward administration. I'm not a legislator, I'm an administrator." Okay. This is down in Winona, Farmers Community Park. I used to hang out from Rochester originally. We used to go on school trips and hang out at Farmers Community Park. This is in 1946, believe it or not.
Hear that again?
Farmers Community Park. I used to hang. My skills are more oriented toward administration. Ed Fye, who had taken over as governor, "You should run for the Senate. My skills are more." That seat, Harold Stassen tells Ed Fye, who had taken over as governor, "You should run for the Senate. My skills are more oriented toward administration. I'm not a legislator, I'm an administrator." Okay.
He's not a legislator, he's an administrator. Fascinating.
This is in 1946. Believe it or not, already Harold Stassen was campaigning for governor, or for president, excuse me. You think election cycles start early today? You can thank Harold Stassen. He was already announcing that he would seek the nomination in 1948. Okay, so here is that great campaign of 48. This is that debate I was telling you about right here. Thomas Dewey speaking on the radio. Harold Stassen getting ready for his rebuttal. Thomas Dewey, I love this. I found in a book, Theodore Roosevelt's oldest daughter, Alice, who was born of his first wife, very caustic, very critical of others, but had great one-liners. And her one-liner about Thomas Dewey was, she had 2 of them. She said, "Whenever I looked at Thomas Dewey, I couldn't help but think of the little groom on the wedding cake." Have you ever seen the little, okay. And then she said, he had run in 44 and lost. He's running again in 48. Somebody said, this is Roosevelt, Longworth Roosevelt at that time. "What do you think of Thomas Dewey?" And she says, "I oppose him on the theory that you can't make a souffle rise twice."
I think I just need to put that back in context.
Almost unanimously, only 2 people voted against it. One of them was. All right, 1946, Harold Stassen comes home. Good money had him running for the U.S. Senate. Now, he could have won that. It would have been against Henrik Shipstead, who had gone from the House into the Senate. By the way, I told you the UN Charter had the word independence on it. It was voted on in the U.S. Senate. It was passed almost unanimously. Only 2 people voted against it. One of them was Henrik Shipstead from Minnesota. Instead of running for that seat, Harold Stassen tells Ed Fye, who had taken over as governor, "You should run for the Senate. My skills are more oriented toward administration. I'm not a legislator, I'm an administrator."
Right.
This is down in Winona, Farmers Community Park. I used to hang out from Rochester.
So just to turn that in context, administration, going for the presidency, for instance, or being a governor, not being in the House of Representatives, not being a senator. That's the key thing. He doesn't see himself as a lawmaker, despite the fact that he was in law. He sees someone who manages things, who prefers to run for something where it's management. So that's an interesting. It's less about the pursuit of a high position necessarily. It's more discerning than that. It's where could I utilize my skill sets to provide the greatest good based on what I'm good at doing, which seems to me to be managing things. Now, in the context of being a governor or in terms of being a president.
We used to go on school trips and hang out at Farmers
Community Park. This is in
And that could still be a cover for being a power motivation because the presidency is, far more glamorous than being a senator, but still.
1946, believe it or not, already Harold Stassen was campaigning for governor or for president. Excuse me. You think election cycles start early today? You can thank Harold Stassen. He was already announcing that he would seek the nomination.
Already announcing.
1948. Okay, so here
Get started early. Early bird gets the worm.
This is the debate I was telling you about right here. Thomas Dewey speaking on the radio. Harold Stassen getting ready for his rebuttal. Thomas Dewey, I love this. I found in a book. Theodore Roosevelt's oldest daughter, Alice, who was born of his first wife, very caustic, very critical of others.
Starting early. I think it's extroverted sensation in a strong position.
Little groom on the wedding cake.
Lots of energy.
Seen the little, okay. And then she said he had run in 44 and lost. He's running again in 48. Somebody said, this is Roosevelt, Longworth Roosevelt at that time. What do you think of Thomas Dewey? And she says, I oppose him on the theory that you can't make a souffle rise twice. And then Dewey ends up getting the nomination. But I love this cartoon going into Philadelphia. The spirit of 48, fife and drum here, Dewey, tap, they beating each other up. And here comes Harold Stassen with a drum on crutches. He comes in a distant third. The irony, of course, of that election, I tell my students, is this. Thomas Dewey, having won the nomination, listening to all of the polls, all of the newspapers, believes the election is his, and he doesn't really campaign. He decides to be above the fray. And of course, those of you who are old enough to remember know that Harry Truman ran one of the most vigorous, spirited whistle-stop campaigns in American political history, and he ends up winning that election. I do not doubt for a second that if Harold Stassen had got the nomination, he would not have sat on a back porch or a front porch.
No.
He would have campaigned vigorously. This may have been different.
He's an absolute workhorse. Is the key thing about Stassen.
1952. This is just like being a teacher. I get applauded all the time. So it's not bothering me. I apologize if it bothers you. This happens spontaneously in class all the time. I'm sure you can imagine. Dwight Eisenhower here had brilliantly surrounded himself with two very intelligent international figures. One is John Foster Dulles, his Secretary of State, the man who had a pedigree for being Secretary of State. His grandfather and his great uncle had both been Secretaries of State. Eisenhower said of John Foster Dulles, of course, I'm going to appoint him. He's been studying to be Secretary of State since he was 6. Okay. But he also brought on Harold Stassen, first as his coordinator of foreign operations, and then he named him his special assistant on disarmament. And of course, I have an entire chapter on this. The White House was not large enough for these two figures. The press very quickly, and I find this very intriguing, the press very quickly dubbed Harold Stassen the Secretary of Peace. They said he's our nation's very first Secretary of Peace. And Eisenhower didn't have a problem with that because in 1955, when he did this, he wanted to show the Russians, the Soviets, that we were interested in peace. And he had no problem with the press calling him that. Well, John Foster Dulles had a big problem with that. Because he went to the president and said, if he's Secretary of Peace, what does that make me? Secretary of saber rattling, Secretary of nuclear war. And in the end, Harold Stassen had burned too many bridges in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
One of the biggest bridges came in 52.
Managing the relationships, positioning himself in a strategically political way is the weakness.
He tried to get him off, and he was never forgiven by either Nixon or Republicans who believed that he was trying to break the Republican Party up when all he was really doing was saying, I don't think Richard Nixon should be president. So he ends up leaving in 1958. Fascinating. He wanted to show the Russians, the Soviets, that we were interested in peace, and he had no problem with the press calling him that. Well, John Foster Dulles had a big problem with that.
He didn't stick to his lane.
Said he's Secretary.
He didn't stick to his lane.
Secretary of saber rattling, Secretary of. And in the end, Harold Stassen had burned too many bridges in the Republican Party. And one of the biggest bridges came in 52 and 56 when he tried to get Richard Nixon off the ticket. He did not believe that Richard Nixon had the moral aptitude to be president of the United States. Fascinating. And he tried to get him off, and he was never forgiven by either Nixon or Republicans who believed that he was trying to break the Republican Party up when all he was really doing was saying, I don't think Richard Nixon should be president. So he ends up leaving in 1958. He then goes on to his international law practice. He goes back to Philadelphia, where he had lived for 4 years when he was president of the University of Pennsylvania, eventually coming back in the 1970s. I was with, over the weekend,
Albert said could not be done. Let's never forget the real progress of the world has always come because some men have done what others said could not be done. That is, I think, a definitive aspect of Stassen. Trying to do what is impossible. Like becoming the president.
He does try to run for the Senate against Rudy Boschwitz. Some of you might remember this. This was probably a very difficult time for Harold Stassen. Rudy Boschwitz.
Yeah, I think he has to be an LC.
John Locke's here, and they have this wonderful book sale they do every year. And I asked him where it was, and he says, "Do you remember where the old Plywood, Minnesota building is?" And I said, "No, but isn't that Rudy Boschwitz's business?" He said, "It sure is." And I said, "Boy, that reminds me of Harold Stassen." And so we talked a little bit, and then I realized for the last 8 years.
The alternative could be ESC. The alternative is ESC.
At that point, I realized I really didn't. Okay. So I appreciate your attention very much. I do have copies of the book if you're interested. I'd be happy to inscribe.
That's it. Let's see if there's anything else I can find on him. I thought there's this Stassen quote, and I thought, no, this is too introverted intuition. Yeah, John F. Kennedy. Right. I think this is a debate. Been the security of domestic nations. Totalitarian causes work in secret. So there's a sort of a you take quite robust positions on things whilst at the same time not being ideological. I think it's again that extra sensation in the demonstrative would make a lot of sense here. I think it's Stassen's personal life. I'd be interested in. What's his personal life like? Maybe there's something here. Right. Oh, what's this? Actually, quickly look at performance. Approach and do from the typical campaign behavior. It's kind of a polished speech, ready with conviction, but without passion. But he will actually do his experience as a prosecutor. He abandoned politician style, speaking in favor of less rehearsed performance of prosecutor remarks, which was more authentic than Stassen's performance. Was impressed by Dewey's demeanor. So he composed and was detached while Stassen was speaking and saying that in Dewey's own speech, his pace was deliberate, his tone thoughtful. Stassen spoke due to notes of people holding the speech and the questions that Stassen posed. She took many notes during Stassen's speech. They read. Yeah, it's a lacked passion, dry. Due to the Stassen completely surrendered because this was not the proposal. Slow to only 450 words in the first 4 minutes. Dewey spoke steadily, adjusting his volume of his tempo at each point. Stassen made 39 statements promoting his own position, 25 said attacking Dewey, 5 defending. Right, okay, fine. All the attacks towards Stassen. So split his between Dewey and communists. At no point was the opposing Democrat Party mentioned. Statements about policy, about character, about 48% of the debate, respectively. Yeah, I think that dryness is quite particular here. Oh, Isaac, your question. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with LSC. Part of the reason I put his name in to see if type could provide insight to why he'd never stop running. Exactly. It's the introverted intuition vulnerable. It's the idea that if you just work hard enough, if you just account for all the different possibilities, you will eventually get it. Perspiration makes your future success, and he took that quite literally. I think continuing to run campaign vigorously, putting out all the stops as he did so well in the early part of his career, but he could never accept the fact that due to his lack of political strategy in terms of his relationships with people in the party and what the longer term effects that would be, that it basically made it impossible. And that when he started to be perceived as a joke running, anyone with even the slightest shred of introverted intuition would have stopped running at that point. It was just they would say, throw in the towel. My ambitions are just not going to happen. Well, Stassen's like, no, it's still possible. I could still do it. And he kept on doing it. And even making a joke of himself and, not taking himself too seriously in that respect, showing some humor came to running against Ronald Reagan. which I don't think an EIE would stand for, to be honest. Yeah, no, I think LSE makes the most sense. So thank you very much for that suggestion, Isaac. That was a very interesting one. Right, does anyone else want me to type anyone else? I know it's been just under 2.5 hours, but I'm happy to do one more person. If people want, I'll wait 5 more minutes just to see. And if not, we can stop it there. Whilst I'm waiting, I'm going to quickly look at his personal life. Let's see. Religious life. Raised as a Baptist, active with Baptist associations, which is a liberal team, joined Martin Luther King. Thought came from his religious beliefs. Much of his pursuit of world peace, I think, must be very much in line with sort of religious beliefs. Just doing the right thing seems to me to be the key thing here. I don't think there's much depth beyond it. Interreligious Committee on Peace, interfaith dialogue. So I'm so many LSEs who get very interested in interfaith dialogue, hearing different perspectives, trying to find peace by hearing different perspectives. Yes. Baptist writing more as much as a church figure as a political candidate. Anything else from his sort of personal life? There's no mention of personal life except for the church stuff. Views in healthcare. Proposed expanding Medicare. So he was very much a centrist, but did not like the communists, did not like the ideologues, wanted to ban the ideologues in a sort of slightly overly robust view. Whereas Dewey, of course, didn't want to because he thought that would be authoritarian. He was awarded Legion of Merit for meritorious service in the position. He did well. Everything where you could just manage things and run them, he did very well. He failed at the political strategic. Yeah, I think LSE makes most sense for him. All right. It looks as though there aren't any more requests at this point in time. We're going to wait a little bit longer, and then I'm going to draw the live stream to a close. Just a question to people. Is Wednesday good? Do people like Wednesday? Because what I'm thinking of doing is alternating each week. So one week I do a Wednesday, one week I do a Sunday. Is that good? Do people like that? Or would they prefer if I just did it on Sundays? Oh, I've got to say a question. Have you ever found a very antisocial alpha? I think LIIs can get sort of antisocial, sort of an avoidant way. They just avoid company, they become recluses because they could be fearful of social rejection. But also, I've noticed that quite a few ILEs taking on very sort of gamma-ish ways of speaking about what they value and what they like to do, and almost being almost deliberately sort of antisocial to some degree. I think there's a tendency for the alpha NTs to have to go on that sort of journey before they realize that the more pro-social approach brings them greater happiness. So yeah, I think you can find that, but the trend is towards being very pro-social and communitarian. But the asking types, what I call the antithetic types within alpha, they can show that more sort of independent mindset until um they reconcile themselves to their value sets. Okay, so Darwin likes the alternating schedule. Isaac prefers Sunday. Fair enough. Right. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And yes, thank you for your donations. Thank you to Isaac. Thank you to Darwin. Yeah, thank you to Schmerz. And thank you to LLD 3007 for starting it off. Take care now.